All right, so 152, we're at number 7, and we just finished that long story about what's his name? It's already been a week, so I've forgotten the story already. But the guy who was called up to it's Rabbi Bar Nachmani, but he was called up to the academy in the sky to resolve a difficulty on skin disease. And now we're shifting gears. We're actually going to go back to the original subject of this chapter, which is labor relations. But before we get to that, we've got one more little story to tell. And the only reason we're telling the story, apparently you can look at Steinsaltz, the story is because previously, and we'd actually studied these probably over a year ago, these stories, because I left it and then came back to it. There are several stories about the bodies of rabbis and kind of the bodies, their actual physical bodies and their kind of responsibilities and what they thought of their bodies. It's fascinating stuff. We're kind of ending now this whole section on stories about the rabbi, stories about their bodies, with a little story about Shimon ben Chalafta. Then we're going to go back to a Mishnah which you don't have in front of you, but I'll read. So number 7 on page 152. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Baal Basar Hava. So Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, the term there is Baal Basar, which means that he had a lot of flesh. Basar is flesh. He was a person of flesh. Yeah. Zaftig, yeah. I'm avoiding the word fat. That's not politically correct, but the fact is that it wasn't necessarily an insult to call somebody a Baal Basar, because it meant you were wealthy and you had enough food. You had enough food, right? So, and you were healthy. And you were probably a leader in the community, and right, it was healthy to have a lot of food. So so I'm not sure it's a pejorative at all. Gluttony is a pejorative, but I'm not. We'll see. I'm not sure that this is really the point here. Anyhow, you'll see what the point in a second. Yom echada, one day, havi chamim alai. It was hot. So people that have a Baal Basar issue, people that are overweight, may experience heat a little bit more than other people. I think that's the Havai Salik, V'ativ Ashina Ditura. So he left where he was and he climbed a mountain because he thought there would be cool breezes at the top of the mountain. Okay, it was hot, so he went to the mountains, like people do in Colorado in the summer, because it's cooler there. And apparently his daughter went with him. Amarla livrate. He says to his daughter, Biti hanifili alai benanifna vani eten lach kikarin denerd. Okay, so he says, my daughter, fan me with that fan. So she is a fan. They had fans in those days before air conditioning. They had fans, and they were made out of this fanny kind of material, fan-like material. And he says, obviously sort of playfully, it's his daughter, and in return, I'll give you some nard. Nard is a fragrant, a spice. He says, so you fan me, and I'll give you this nard, which you can use as a perfume. Just kind of a playful little conversation between father and daughter. Adahachi, as it happened, nashva zika. As soon as he said that, a breeze came. Not from the fan, but a breeze from nature. So he said, Amar, kama kikarin denerd limare dichi. And he says, well, how much nerd do not I now owe my master, meaning God? Because I'm rewarding my daughter for fanning me. How much more should I reward God, who is the ultimate fan? Of course, we could say, well, God brought the heat also, so we can blame him for the heat. But anyway, the point of this little story is that to have a sense of gratitude as you go through life. There's a nice breeze. Remember who's providing the breeze, and a kind of mindfulness, which is current right now in a lot of spiritual writing. Just be aware that breeze that you're experiencing is really lovely and beautiful and a blessing, and take a moment to feel a sense of gratitude for that. That's the point of that story. That's what he's saying. If I'm going to reward my daughter for a little fan, I should definitely think of the master of the universe, the God who provides me with all these simple pleasures in my daily life. And if I'm not noticing them, then I'm missing something really important and profound about my spiritual life. Okay, that's the end of the story. Any questions? Okay, so now I'm going to go back, and you don't have it, but I have it in my book, and I'm going to read a portion from the Mishnah that we're going to discuss now for several weeks at least, maybe even several months. So this is the Mishnah, and I'm not going to go through it in much detail. Some of it we already studied in detail, and then we'll get to the part that they quote, but we have to hear the whole Mishnah to understand the context. Okay. Hasocheret hapoalim, somebody hires workers. V'yamar lehem ashkimu lehariv. And he says that in the payment, the time, your time clocks, they had time clocks in those days, it's going to include the time it takes for you to get here. In other words, the time clock starts. Good way of saying it. Travel time here and there. If they made that arrangement, makom shenagul shalol ashkim v'lo la'ariv eino rashai lechofan. Okay, if according to local custom, that's not the local custom. Even if it's in the original contract, you can't overturn that. So that's interesting. And you'll see this always goes by. Local custom is very important. So even if they arrange orally to go against local custom still wins out. Okay. Makom shenahagu lazun yazun. If it's local custom to provide a meal, food, then you have to do it. L'sapek b'mitika. And if it's to provide dessert, mitika is a sweet thing. Isapek, you should do it. Hakol kamin hagamidina. Everything according to the local custom. Min hagamidima means custom, and Medina is the state, but it means the local custom. Okay? Now, a little story. Maseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Matya shamar livno. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Matya, who owned a field, said to his son, Tsei schor lanu po'alim. Go out and hire for us workers. Halach ufasak lahem mizonot. So he found the workers, and he made an arrangement for them that he would provide food. He would provide meals. Now remember, if it's local custom to provide food, you have to provide food nonetheless, right? There's actually no need for that to be in the contract since that's law. But nevertheless, he put it in the contract. Okay. Kishaba etzel avi. So he comes to his father, presumably explains to him the arrangements for their hiring, including that I arranged for them, I put in the contract they get meals. Amarlo. So the rabbi now rebukes his son and says, Beni, my son, afilu imata oselahem kisudat shlomo b'shato lo yatzata yedecha varcha imahen shehen b'nei Avraham Yitzchak v'Yakov. Okay, so he said, son, even if from now on we give them a meal worthy of Solomon the king, we wouldn't be fulfilling our obligation because after all, these are the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they have that infinite worth. Now, so this is a little complicated, and we're gonna unpack that a bit. But I'll tell you, at the surface, it means that as soon as you wrote in the contract, provide a meal, then our obligation is limitless, because you just wrote the word meal in there, and they could say, hey, what about the stuffed pheasant? For me, that's a meal. What about champagne? That's a meal. You just put in meal, and if you say feed, well, these are, remember, and now he's going, remember their dignity as Jews. You owe them, actually, the finest meal you could possibly imagine, even a finer meal than what Solomon got. So you've gotten us in big trouble because you just put the word meal in there, and it's easy to interpret that as being almost an infinite obligation. And he didn't have to put it because there is a local custom. And now he's afraid that, now his fear here actually is unjustified, but maybe he doesn't know the Mishnah. But he's afraid that they're going to follow the contract and not the local custom, which would give them the right to demand a tremendously expensive meal. Okay? That's the best I can do right now to explain it. I'm going to keep going. Ella ad shelo yatchilu b'mlacha tzei v'amor lahem. Okay, so go back now, before they even start work, and just say to them, Al manat she'en lachem alai, ella pat v'kitnit bilvad. And then go back and then explain to them what I meant by meal, by food that I'm providing for you, is just some bread and kitnit is like hummus. What's the legume? Like a bean or something. It's so you get a bread dish and you get a bean dish, and that's all I meant. So you have to specify what the meal is going to be. Well, the bean is the protein. Yeah, and it's actually, if you're a nutritionist, it's a complete protein. As long as it's a whole grain pita. So I'm assuming it's a whole grain pita in those days, because that was the cheaper. Right? Yeah. Okay. Rabban Shimon Megamli Amir. So Rabban Shimon Megamli adds Lo Yatzirich Lamar. So Rabbi Shimon Megamli says he didn't actually have to say that because Hakol Kamin Hagamidina. Because after all, everything follows local custom. And the local custom really is just bread and beans. Right. But he was being extra careful, and he was really nervous about that. You put food in there, and they might interpret food as being as an incredibly great meal. We'll never be able to fulfill it. So go and clarify it's not a great meal. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says he actually didn't have to do that because local custom would have overridden any kind of demands they had. All right, that's the mission. Now we're back to our page. and again it's 152. And the phrase that we're looking at is line 14. Hakol kamin hagamidina. Everything follows local custom. Okay, v'chule. Hakol. All right, so the word there, everything. So why do they have everything? Is that really everything? I mean, that is everything follows local custom. There's nothing that doesn't follow local custom. And why would you need that word? Why don't you just say in matters of food or in matters of hiring workers? So that's a very inclusive word. So we want to know, what is it including? Okay? Hakol latue mai. So everything includes what? Okay, here's it. Latue, to include, ba'atra, dinahiga, michrach rifta, umishta anpaka. Okay, so it includes, if hypothetically there's a place where the minhag medina, the local custom, is bread, and it says a small cup. And Steinsaltz says he's probably correct. That includes a
small cup of water.
Yeah, alcoholic.
Right.
You know, apparently, like, drinking alcohol in those days was just like it is in France today. It was pretty standard in a meal, even if it's breakfast, right? You go to McDonald's, right, and you get wine with it.
Wasn't necessarily a healthy pot.
Yeah, and I actually think, they felt like you got a little lift, just like we have coffee.
Right.
There's no mention of coffee in the Talmud, and I'm not an expert in these things, but my guess is they didn't have coffee in the Talmud, and so their coffee may have been alcoholic. It kind of gave them a little lift. And who knows what they put into it. Now, it doesn't actually say alcohol here, and it's possible Steinsaltz is off, although I don't think he is. I think the consensus is it means alcohol, which would be more expensive. Anyway, so let's say that's the custom. De'iyamar lahu, kadimu va'aite lechu. If you were to say to them, you, the employer, were to say to them, come early, and I'll give that to you. Amrulo, the workers can then say back to him, lo kol kaminach. They can say, and this is a standard phrase, it's not up to you. Because if the local custom is to provide breakfast, let's say that you get there at 8, you're contracted to get there at 8, and the local custom is it gives you breakfast, you're not allowed to say, if you get here at 7:45, you'll get breakfast. So work starts at 8, and that's when you give them the breakfast. So if the employer tries to get around that and saying, yes, there's breakfast, but it's only if you get here early, they can say back, lo kol kaminach. It's not up to you. We actually have a custom in these parts, and you're providing and that's the local custom. You're providing breakfast. You provide it when work starts. You don't have to come early for it. Okay. All right. We'll keep going. Got some time. Maaseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Matya Shamar Livno. Okay, so now we're going back to that story about Rabbi Yochanan, whose son contracted with workers. And now we're quoting, Tzei uschor v'chule. So go hire me, etc. What I already told you. Maaseh li store. Okay, why do we have this story? That's what they're asking. Do we have the story because it contradicts our Mishnah? I mean, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel already pointed that out, that it contradicts our Mishnah. We don't need this story because the Mishnah says you follow local custom. It could be that it's intended as a different opinion, which is that you better make sure that your oral agreement is set because, in fact, oral agreements do contradict local custom. So they're curious about why we have this story. First of all, why would you introduce a story that goes against the Mishnah unless you want that to be a valid opinion? Sometimes you have different opinions in the Mishnah. But it doesn't seem like that because in the end it ends with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel saying he didn't have to do that. All right. Anyway, so that's a good question. Why do we have this story when it contradicts the Mishnah? Okay. Chisure me chasra. Okay. So it's interesting. The Talmud actually says the story is incomplete. It's a defective story. Now, when they say that, it's interesting. We don't really know exactly what they mean when they say that. I mean, some people might say they have another manuscript, so they have another version of the story. Some people might say that they're just assuming that there's more to the story, which actually is a pretty radical move on their part, because what they end up doing and then is rewriting the story themselves.
To justify it.
Yeah, they say, oh, Rabbi Yochanan must have meant when he said the story, and he left out some words, but we're confident that he actually meant X, Y, and Z. Now, remember, the other possibility is that, I have a manuscript of the story, or I remember it differently, or I have a different oral tradition that has this in the story. So it's either they rewrote the story themselves, they were creative and they rewrote the story themselves, or they had another version of the story floating around, either orally or written. And we don't know, but it's probably what I I can't remember now if it was the latter or the former. It's probably they're rewriting the story themselves because they can't imagine Rabbi Yochanan would have told a story that contradicts the Mishnah. So probably what's happening is they're saying, here's what he really meant when he told the story. We're just going to add a few words. Okay. Because I think they felt empowered to do that. Okay. V'hachli katani. This is what it should say. Ve'im pasak lahem mizonot, riba lahem. And if he promised them food, okay, riba lahem, he actually promises, you're allowed to interpret that as more rather than less. As soon as he promises them food in the contract, they're saying, this is the law that Mishnah means. Then you actually are, if that's in the contract, you are promising more than local custom. Otherwise, why would you put it in? Now, if that's the case, if he really believes that's the law, then yes, then he's in trouble. He better go back to them and tell them exactly what he means by food. Umasenami b'Rabbi Yochanan ben Matya shamar livno, and that explains then why we have that story, because the Mishnah itself is missing those few words, which are im pasak lemizonot riba lahem. Just if you decided to give them food in the contract, then the local custom is you're actually giving them more, because otherwise you would just get them the bread and the beans. But as soon as you say, in other words, that's the law and that's the local custom. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan wasn't going against the Mishnah. He was accepting local custom, and he was correcting his son validly. We get that? Really? Okay. It's a little complicated. Okay. And now it says, Seos chor lanu palim, go get us workers. And now it just repeats the story. Upasak lehem mizonot, and he put food in the contract. Ukishabai Tel Aviv, Amarlo, we're just repeating the story. Bini, afilu ata aselan, kisudat shlomo, bishato, lo yatzati de chavadcha, imahen shehem b'nei Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, which is basically what I said before. Just putting a meal in there, now we're obligated for even more than Solomon, because these people have the dignity of being sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right. That's an interesting point, too, which we're going to examine, that Jews, because here he's talking about them as Jews. Now, if they'd happened to have been non-Jews, would he have said the same? He wouldn't have said sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he could have said they're descendants of Adam or they're descendants of Noah, and he could say a human being has this kind of infinite worth. We don't know. My sense is he probably would have said it for non-Jews also, but clearly hired Jews. So he's doing the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob thing as showing, look, workers have infinite worth. So if you're saying you get a meal, that meal is no different than the meal you would give to Solomon. So you're not putting them in a separate class. And Solomon is the richest person of all time. You're not putting them in a separate class from Bill Gates. What Bill Gates deserves, they deserve. So you better go back, and that's the inherent worth, the inherent dignity of a human being. So you better go back and say what you mean by that meal, because what they deserve is the same as the wealthiest human being of all time. But we can't necessarily afford to give them what they deserve. Yeah.
Were the laws of kashrut at all codified at this time? I mean, would that have anything to do with?
Sure. I mean, there would be. I mean, I think for a Jew, it would be assumed.
If you hired Jews, you had to do something different in terms of tradition, ritual.
Well, you'd have to give them kosher food, but my assumption is that that's the food they had around the house. Yeah. Because this is a Jewish polity at this point, just like Israel's. Like you can assume in Jerusalem the food's kosher, so you would assume. Yeah.
Is there another interpretation that with local policy you can't detract from local policy, but you can add to it?
Well, that's what this whole discussion is going to be about that, so I'll hold off on answering that. That's the local custom versus what you can add in the contract is really that's the whole point here.
And if I may throw in an aside, at one point in the past you were talking about olives not being able to make oil or something like that. I was just bicycling in a region which is the heel of Italy, which making olive oil is a big thing.
Right.
And they have bad years when the olives are wet. And when the olives are wet, they don't yield much oil.
Right.
So you were talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
That somehow the crop cannot be good for making oil. Indeed, that happens.
Yeah, we were talking about that in leasing land. Yeah. If you're a sharecropper and you get a bad year and you do the olives, so that would be a bad year if they were wet olives.
The olives are wet, and they don't produce much oil.
Right. All right. I think it's 8:30. We'll stop here.